Welcome all. I'm joined by Arina Zohrabian, the Executive Director of the Armenian Volunteer Corps. So Arina Zohrabian, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation.
So I want to go over a few things to do with AVC, the Armenian Volunteers Corps. To start off, something which I find many of our watchers will find interesting is the senior corps. Oftentimes when we think of volunteering in Armenia, we think of young diasporans, birthright, doing, coming back to the country and doing sort of volunteer programs. But AVC has this senior corps. We did a reportage about AVC about a year back. We met some lovely volunteers like Sheila, who were seniors themselves, who wanted to give back to Armenia, etc. So can you tell us exactly who is eligible for the senior corps and what these senior volunteers go on to do with their time in Armenia?
Yeah, it's actually a beautiful story. More and more we're seeing that seniors 60 plus who are retiring have more and more time, mostly diasporans, but sometimes also non-Armenians who have some connection with Armenia, whether their child has married an Armenian. And they want to come and, the tourist experience is always fun in Armenia, but it becomes a little bit boring at one point. And they say, how many times can I go to Garni Gerart? How many times can I go to Sevan? I actually want to do something while I'm here and have a little bit more of a long-term impact. So we have more than 300% increased the number of senior volunteers, those 60 plus who are coming to Armenia, donating, dedicating a minimum of 2 weeks, a maximum of 1 year. So in Sheila's case, she came for a full year. She's still here, working in any field that is of interest, whether it is their field of expertise or whether it is something that they, let's say they're tired of what they were doing for their entire lives and they want to try something else, or they feel like they can make an impact elsewhere, then allowing us to customize an experience that for 20 hours a week, they're really giving back and doing a lot for Armenia and the companies that they're volunteering with.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, in terms of customizing the volunteer work they will be doing so that it is, suitable for them. Can you explain a bit how these work placements are actually beneficial to Armenia? I mean, what sort of different sectors are we talking about? Are they sectors to do even, for example, with human rights, women's rights, the environment? Can you speak a bit on that?
Sure. So it's very, very customized. So we're working in absolutely every field depending on not only volunteer interests, but also expertise. So specifically related to women's rights and human rights, we have a number of volunteers currently and in the past who have been working with the Ombudsman's Office, the NKR Representative Office, Democracy Today, the Women's Support Center, Women's Resource Center, doing things from researching various policies from similar countries to see where we stand in terms of gender-based violence and domestic abuse laws, domestic violence laws, and really trying to pave the way for sort of a better situation down the road, which unfortunately, not only in Armenia, but around the world is very much a struggle. We have currently a volunteer who is working with us, who is a gender-based violence expert, who is working on a publication related to women, peace, and security in Armenia, also working on really raising awareness about the plight of the situation in Artsakh today, because we see that there's a lot of noise, unfortunately, in the world related to what's happening in Ukraine, but we're facing a massive crisis in Artsakh that internationally we don't see too much noise about, and it's a very sad thing to see. So we have volunteers who are working, impacting those organizations by providing very much needed work, whether it's research or whether it's policy analysis, a lot of different things.
I also want to ask about your own journey because you volunteered for AVC a while back, and then you went on to work for IREX and then at the American University of Armenia, and now you're back at AVC as the executive director. So you really have insight into how AVC can, be a great introduction to your experiences in Armenia. Can you speak a bit about your own experience, your own story with AVC? Yeah,
so I actually graduated in marketing and finance, and I had this, very set path for myself of breaking every glass ceiling and, entering the corporate world. And then I decided before sort of moving into corporate America that I would volunteer with the Armenian Volunteer Corps for a year. It was something that my brother had introduced me to when he had come to volunteer for 3 months prior to me in 2001. So I came in 2002. I was expecting, you know, a 1-year experience. I started volunteering with AVC itself, as well as Vars Media Documentary Film Studio. And 1 year has now turned into 21 years. The network that it gave me, the experience that it gave me, it was really extremely life-changing for me, because AVC, it's not just volunteering, it's a complete, you know, 180 shift in the way that you look at things. So from excursions to language classes, to complete support during your being in Armenia, it really allowed me to grow. And it, you know, I'm not working in business. I've been in nonprofit and education for the past 20 years. So it was a, you know, pretty big shift for me, but it's been the most fulfilling experience that I feel very honored and fortunate to have.
Well, I also find interesting, because I started my journey in Armenia as a volunteer, but at Birthright, AVC and Birthright make an effort to create a sense of inclusivity and to, you know, be tolerant of all these different people coming from every continent, every background, etc. At the same time, they have to make the volunteers aware that they are in Armenia and they may be confronted with certain, you know, environments or aspects which they are not familiar with. Do you guys really have a focus on that, in that the organization creates a sense of inclusivity and tolerance, but also prepares volunteers for the realities of Armenia as well?
During your Birthright days, you'll know that upon arrival, every single volunteer is going through an orientation where they're sort of made aware. Armenians are this amazing people that have this genuine curiosity about others. And to some extent, it is conservative, but we really haven't faced, knock on wood, too many issues. You know, whether you know, we've had a few Black volunteers who have come and who've said it's sort of suffocating in terms of the amount of stares that they're getting, but it's typically, you know, it is very frustrating, but it is coming typically from a good place.
Curiosity almost.
Curiosity, exactly. So tu, as they say in Armenian, we haven't had too much of an issue, but they do have the support. We have psychosocial support for all of our volunteers, so that if they do face any issues, if they are, you know, feeling a little targeted, or we're always there to talk them through and sort of help them overcome that experience.
The same with the seniors. I mean, are there challenges the seniors face that you have to work on as an organization?
I think so. I love stories, right? My favorite story that sort of responds to that is, you know, seniors are a little bit more set in their ways. You know, they've lived their lives and they have a specific way of doing things. So we had a senior volunteer who came and who was placed at a specific organization, and she was very, very fast-paced, like very fast-moving. The organization, not as much, right? They like to do things a little bit more slowly. So the culture shock of, you know, her trying to push things through a lot faster. You know, it was like this hilarious comedy to some extent of figuring out how does she slow down, but also work on, you know, speeding up that organization. And ultimately it becomes this really organic sort of change, both for the volunteer as well as for the organization. So it's little things like that, but typically, you know, they're coming in with a little bit more patience. They're putting in 20 hours a week of volunteering, and they're not necessarily just dedicated to one site. So they're really in there with an understanding of like a long-term vision of, you know, I'm there to do this, I'm there to do that. And so, yeah, we haven't had too many issues. And
I mean, if a watcher is watching and is, you know, curious about AVC, maybe even joining AVC themselves, they understood that, for example, they will have, you know, job sites that are recommended, which are appropriate for them. But in terms of like accommodation, in terms of getting to Armenia, how can they find out more about these sorts of informations?
So AVC really is a full-stop shop. We're going to support the volunteers from the time of their application. They do have to submit an application, and it is not a short one, but the amount of support that they receive from us is more than worth it. But, you know, once it is fully self-financed by the volunteer, but you know, once they're on the ground, we are working with them to figure out exactly what it is they want to do. We had a senior volunteer. Most of our senior volunteers actually typically decide to stay with host family
Right,
families.
that's interesting.
Because they really want the local experience. It's one thing to come and rent an apartment, but it's another to live with a local family and see how, you know, day-to-day lives are here. And we were initially worried about, you know, sort of the how would they accommodate living in someone else's home, but for the most part, it's been extremely seamless. They've loved it. And for those volunteers who do have a preference towards privacy, they've started typically with host families and then have moved to renting their own apartments. So we have a very flexible approach in terms of, you know, accommodation. So we'll hook them up with host families if they like, but if not, they can go find their own apartments.
Okay. And finally, briefly, Arina, I just wanted to ask, what are the future plans of AVC? Are there any future projects or ambitions you can tell us about?
So AVC Senior Corps was a relatively new addition. So that is the big adjustment, and we're really working to grow. And you know, you mentioned birthright. We're trying to really capture on, you know, the birthright parents. So those who've had children who have come, having them come either with or after their children to experience. And we have a few in the pipeline right now. And really working with our partner organizations to figure out where their needs are to ensure that we're bringing the volunteers that can help impact and improve Armenia.
Okay, perfect. Well, Arina Zohrabian, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.